The human diplomat sat at the threshold of a dusty, wind-swept simple, surrounded via the remnants of a warfare lengthy given that exceeded. The air turned into thick with the smell of spent ordnance and charred earth, and the sky changed into painted a sickly color of orange via the dying mild of the setting solar. This became a acquainted scene to the diplomat, one that they had witnessed endless instances on limitless worlds throughout the galaxy. Yet, regardless of the monotony of all of it, they located a peculiar solace inside the desolate splendor of this precise panorama. The diplomat, whose name turned into recognized simplest to a choose few, changed into now not like other people. They possessed an uncanny potential to recognize and empathize with alien cultures, a present that had led them to this maximum unusual and perilous of careers. It became said that when the diplomat spoke, even the maximum hardened of warlords would lower their weapons, and the most bitter of enemies might lay down their fingers. As the diplomat sat there, considering the nation of the galaxy, a small, bushy creature scurried out from at the back of a burnt-out tank and approached them. It was a Custinian, a species acknowledged for his or her foxy and interest. The diplomat had befriended the creature on a preceding visit to the planet, and it had followed them ever due to the fact. The Custinian hopped up onto the diplomat's lap and began to groom their thick, brown fur. The diplomat stated to the creature, their deep, bass voice rumbling lightly, what do you are making of all this? They gestured vaguely on the carnage round them. The Custinian paused in its grooming for a second, then cocked its head to at least one aspect, considering the question. Finally, it let loose a small squeak that the diplomat took to mean pretty messy. They chuckled softly. Indeed, the diplomat agreed. But that is wherein I are available. With a sigh, they stood up and stretched, casting their enforcing shadow across the barren panorama. It's time to peer if I can perform a little top right here. The Custinian hopped down from the diplomat's lap and dusted itself off, then scampered off closer to the close-by ruins of a bunker, no question seeking safe haven from the approaching night. The diplomat watched the creature disappear into the shadows, then became again to face the assignment to hand. They took a deep breath, squared their wide shoulders, and commenced to walk in the direction of the smoldering remains of the enemy encampment. As they approached the camp, the diplomat should see figures shifting some of the tents and banners. Some have been human, others were extraterrestrial beings of each shape and length conceivable. They knew that not they all would be receptive to their presence, however additionally, they knew that they needed to try. For the sake of limitless lives, and the future of the galaxy itself, they could not manage to pay for to fail. The wind picked up, rustling through the tattered stays of the enemy flags, and the diplomat felt the weight in their duty pressing down upon them. But additionally, they felt a feel of willpower, of cause, that burned brighter than any sundown. They have been given a hazard to make a distinction, and that they meant to capture it with each arms. As they stepped into the camp, they noticed a tall, powerfully built determine emerge from the shadows. The figure turned into clad inside the armor of a fashionable, and its chin was embellished with the regal bearing of one who believed themselves to be above reproach. The diplomat knew that this was the chief they had to attain, the only who could turn the tide of battle. They steeled themselves for what was to come back, and organized to start their most tough negotiation but. I see our esteemed visitor has arrived, the general stated, his voice booming across the camp. His eyes narrowed as he fixed them on the diplomat. Well, properly, nicely. What a marvel. I have to say, I did not anticipate you to live on that little skirmish obtainable. The diplomat willing their head in acknowledgement, their expression calm and unperturbed. Yes, it become touch and go there for some time, they said, their deep voice echoing across the tents. But right here I am, and right here you're. Now, we could speak the phrases of our give up. The preferred let out a quick, barking chortle. Surrender? I'm afraid I do not know what you are speaking approximately, diplomat. We don't give up. We overcome. The diplomat nodded, unsurprised by means of the response. They knew this would no longer be smooth. Then perhaps we should speak the phrases of your eventual capitulation. They stated, their tone firm however respectful. For I guarantee you, well known, your resistance is futile. The longer you combat, the extra lives might be misplaced on both sides. The preferred seemed them coolly, his eyes glinting within the flickering light of the campfires. You may think that you have the upper hand, diplomat, he growled. However, you're wrong. We will fight to the ultimate man, and we will emerge effective. The diplomat leaned in closer, their expression grave. But what if I should offer you a different path? What if I should show you how your soldiers could find peace, and your human beings a destiny really worth fighting for? The general's expression darkened similarly, his frame language anxious and cautious. And what would that future seem like, precisely? He demanded. A destiny in which your human beings are no longer torn apart through battle, the diplomat replied, where your kids grow up in peace, and your people are loose to pursue their dreams without fear. A future in which you, widespread, are remembered not on your victories at the battlefield, however to your information and compassion in bringing an end to the suffering of your people. The preferred regarded them silently for a long moment, his eyes darting back and forth between the diplomat and the tents behind them. The air was heavy with anticipation. And what of the terms of this kind of give up? He in the end asked, his voice betraying a hint of curiosity. What might you have me do? The diplomat leaned again barely, their expression calm and reassuring. I can provide you a generous give-up phrases, trendy. Your squad dies could be handled with recognize and dignity. Your humans may be allowed to go back to their houses, and you yourself might be given the opportunity to steer them into a brand new era of peace and prosperity. The preferred's gaze flickered, as if he had been weighing the diplomat's phrases in opposition to the truth in their situation. After a long second, he sighed deeply and ran a hand through his hair. Very well, he said, subsequently. I will recollect your offer. But recognize this, diplomat, if I am to simply accept your terms, it have to be by myself terms. I will now not be a puppet on your cause, nor will I be made to look vulnerable in the eyes of my humans. The diplomat nodded solemnly. I apprehend. Trendy. I will ensure that your honor is preserved, and your humans' nice pastimes are served. We will work collectively to forge a new future, for the best of all. With that, the diplomat turned and began to walk again in the direction of the camp gates, leaving the overall to don't forget their phrases. As they walked away, they could not help however feel a sense of hope rising inside them. Perhaps, just perhaps, this struggle may want to end peacefully after all. In the tents at the back of them, infantrymen murmured amongst themselves, their voices full of unease and anticipation. The air turned into thick with the smell of sweat, leather-based, and smoke. However, there has been also a brand new scent within the air, the faint hint of possibility, of something distinct, of alternate. It turned into this modification, this wish, that the diplomat held onto as they continued their adventure in the direction of the camp's command middle, ready to present their provide to the overall and begin the long, difficult system of bringing peace to an international torn aside by means of warfare. The trendy, however, turned into not so easily swayed. His expression betrayed a mixture of wariness and suspicion, as though he ought to see through the diplomat's words and motives. As they walked, the general glanced again over his shoulder, his eyes narrowing as they took within the interest behind them. He knew that he became being watched, that each move he made turned into being scrutinized by allies and enemies alike. It became a weighty burden, but one that he bore with dignity and determination. The command center got here into view, its flagpoles flying excessive above the canvas roof, snapping in the breeze just like the tails of angry beasts. The diplomat quickened their step, keen to present their offer and start the negotiations that might form the destiny of now not best this army, but of a whole kingdom. As they approached the middle, the general fell into step beside them, his gaze fixed on the floor, his hands clasped tightly in the back of his returned. "And what, exactly, do you recommend, diplomat?" he asked, his voice low and measured. "How do you wish to cease this struggle? And what, exactly, do you provide us and go back?" The diplomat paused, their eyes assembly the overall steadily. "I propose a ceasefire," they said, their voice clear and strong. "A cessation of hostilities, at some point of which both our forces can regroup and reassess their strategies. And in go back, I offer you the chance to guide your people towards a brighter destiny, one unfastened from the shackles of war and oppression." The well-known's eyes narrowed similarly, if that have been possible. "And what of your terms?" he demanded. "What assurances can we have that one of these ceasefire might be venerated?" The diplomat smiled, a thin, humorless expression. "In my word, popular. The phrase of my country. We have nothing to gain from dishonoring the sort of ceasefire. Our intention isn't always conquest, but peace. And I guarantee you, we will do everything inside our electricity to peer that peace maintained." The fashionable taken into consideration this for a second, his gaze flickering to the tents another time. In the distance, the sound of marching toes could be heard, developing steadily louder. The counterattack was coming. The Standard knew that he had to make a selection quick. With a sigh, he nodded slowly. Very nicely, he said, his voice grim however resigned. I will keep in mind your provide. But recognize this, diplomat, if I am to accept your terms, it have to be on my own terms. I will not be made a fool of by way of my enemies, nor will I be visible as vulnerable earlier than my humans. The diplomat willing their head in expertise. I understand, widespread. I will do the entirety in my strength to ensure that your honor is preserved, and your human beings' high-quality pastimes are served. As the two leaders parted methods, each returning to their respective camps, the air was thick with tension and the know-how that the fate of infinite lives hung within the balance. But for the primary time in many years, there has been additionally a glimmer of wish, a whisper of possibility. Perhaps, just perhaps, the stop of this terrible struggle was sooner or later inside reach. In the general's tent, his advisors gathered around, their expressions a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. They knew the stakes had been high, and that any misstep ought to mean catastrophe for their people. The general, however, seemed unusually calm. He paced slowly, lost in idea, his arms clasped at the back of his lower back. I will don't forget their provide, he eventually said, his voice regular and resolute. But we have to not overlook who we're, or what we have fought for. We must preserve our independence, and our freedom. In the diplomat's quarters, the temper becomes some distance extra subdued. The weight of duty turned into heavy upon their shoulders, and they couldn't assist but feel an experience of unease. They knew that if the ceasefire failed, it might now not best mean the continuation of the war, however also the failure in their entire task. They couldn't have enough money to permit their protect down for a second. As the hours became days, the overall and his advisors met in secret to speak about the terms of the proposed ceasefire. They debated without end, considering each viable outcome and contingency. In the give-up, they reached a selection. The well-known would be given the diplomat's offer, but simplest on their terms. The ceasefire would be unilateral, without ensures of its period. And, most significantly, the general would retain command of his army, with the power to renew hostilities at any time if the terms of the agreement had been violated. The diplomat, upon receiving the overall's reaction, was before everything stunned. They had not predicted any such formidable counteroffer. But as they considered the state of affairs further, they found out that this changed into the handiest manner ahead. The preferred was a proud guy, and he could no longer be made to appearance weak earlier than his human beings. Reluctantly, they agreed to the terms, sealing the address a solemn handshake. The next day, the two leaders met yet again, this time in impartial territory. The general, clad in his full navy regalia, stood tall and proud as he addressed the diplomat. "I have taken into consideration your offer," he said, his voice wearing across the sphere. "And I actually have decided to just accept your terms. Let this be a testimony to the respect and integrity of my people, and of my military. But realize this: any violation of our settlement will be met with speedy and vicious retribution." The diplomat nodded gravely, acknowledged the weight of the general's words.